Computer.
Yes, sir. We have many new tools at the warehouse. What do you need?
I hear we've had some new tools come in that might help our fellow streamers take over the world.
Processing. Processing. The new G-Comp switches.
No, they're not ready for that yet.
Processing. What about a new RetroTink that no one's ever seen before?
Boring. You know the tool that I want.
Processing. We have a new AVerMedia card with 2 inputs on 1 card.
Nani? Bring it to me, now. With this, we will take over the streaming world.
Place your order now!
You know, personally, I felt like AVerMedia were making it way too obvious with their teases, but in case you didn't know this was coming, this is AVerMedia's newest capture card. Capture card? Maybe. Capture card, the Live Gamer Duo. It has 2 inputs and 1 output. Has some pretty cool capabilities, including an awesome multi-app superpower that so far only Elgato has had in the gaming capture card space. But it does have some limitations, and IMO isn't for everyone, even though it serves a big audience that I feel like needed to be served with this in 2017. So what do I mean by it should have been here 3 years ago? Well, the dual inputs are set up so you have 1 input and pass-through for your gaming system, be it a PC or a game console, and then a second input on the same card for a camera. So you can have a full live streaming setup where you have your face cam and your gameplay source all running through the same capture card, which makes it really easy to switch back and forth for game streaming and on one scene and then just vlogging on another to do an update video for your YouTube channel or anything like that without needing the extra USB or PCIe bandwidth to route all of this back and forth, because it's all handled through 1 card, which is very impressive. And like I said, something the streaming community has kind of wanted or needed for a while. DataPath has had such a capture card option, but it was very expensive. But we're finally getting it, and that's great on its own, I suppose. Especially for the price, which is strangely reasonable for what this is. We're gonna get into this. I did also want to mention that AVerMedia have updated and released software for their Live Gamer Bolt, the Thunderbolt 3 external 4K capture card to work on Mac. My current Hackintosh setup isn't cooperating with Thunderbolt at the moment, so I can't show it fully, but wanted to mention that as well. Let's take a look at the card. Physically, it's basically the same as the Live Gamer 4K. It's got a different cutout pattern on the shroud to help differentiate it. Honestly, I like this cutout pattern a little bit better, even though it reveals more of what's underneath it. We've still got the cool same black PCB, same RGB color options, but instead of on the rear little slot, instead of having 2 HDMI ports, it has 3, because there's 2 inputs and 1 output. One of them serves as a pass-through, the other is just an input. It's still a PCIe 4X card, so it will take up the same space in your desktop power computer, and it's just as durable and rugged as before. Specs-wise, it has 2 HDMI inputs. Number 1 is full HDMI 2.0 with full pass-through. It supports 4K 60 pass-through, 1080p 240 FPS, 1440p up to 144 FPS, and 3440 by 1440 ultra-wide up to 100 FPS. So same pass-through support as their Live Gamer 4K model. It also supports HDR pass-through as well. However, it only captures 1080p 60 from everything. It downscales to 1080p 60 or lower, and you cannot capture any higher. It can still capture HDR though, so you can play in full 4K 60 HDR on your PlayStation 4 Pro, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series or One X or what have you, and then capture 1080p 60 HDR. Or it will tone map to SDR if you just want normal SDR streams in OBS or RECentral, which is pretty cool. So, like I said, pretty much same pass-through as their Live Gamer 4K, but it crunches everything down to 1080p 60, which is good overall and all that most people need, but does have a limitation we'll talk about in a moment. HDMI input number 2 is only HDMI 1.4, however, so it only supports up to 1080p 60 input in the first place. Weirdly enough, it did not accept a 4K 30 input either, which is a little strange because most 1080p 60 devices also accept 4K 30. HDMI 1.4 spec can accept 4K 30. That was kind of frustrating, but if you do have a 4K camera running into the second input, since that's what it's designed for, you're going to have an issue and you need to set it to scale down to 1080p for the HDMI output, or just set the camera to 1080p. Unfortunately, there is no HDMI 2.1 support yet, so the new HDMI standards that will be coming out with the new generation of consoles is not yet supported here. That also means there's no adaptive sync support either, so still just standard, mostly console-focused formats, and nothing too future-looking, which is a little concerning. Audio-wise, it does support 7.1 and 5.1 surround sound pass-through support, and you can either downmix to stereo in OBS or in RECentral, or you can actually capture 5.1 surround sound in RECentral now as of the latest update, which is pretty cool. It is a PCIe Gen 2 4X slot card, which means of course it does require a desktop. They could have expanded that to X8 or either like Gen 3 or something to get you more bandwidth and 4K capture on both inputs and things like that, because there are other cards that do that on the X8 slot. However, that would further limit who could use it, because especially on the more consumer chipset motherboards, you're not going to have X8 worth of bandwidth that is really cooperative with capture cards these days. So it's a trade-off of more accessible but way more limited. There's RGB lighting on the little side badge of the card, as with the Live Gamer 4K, with a couple different modes in RECentral, with third-party support coming, so you could integrate it into other RGB options apparently, which is pretty cool. There is an onboard video processor that handles the downscaling as well as any frame rate conversion, so if you want to capture 30 FPS from a 60 FPS stream, you can do that. All the onboard processor handles all of that. However, by being limited to 1080p 60 capture no matter what, screen tearing from PC gaming, especially above 60 Hz, will be much worse than their Live Gamer 4K option or the Elgato 4K 60 Pro Mark II. It is not a UVC card, so Skype and video calling support will be hit or miss. You can use OBS Virtual Cam to use it in OBS and then point it out to a video calling app, and that is an option, but for some that's an annoying workaround. It does support great color modes, so by default NV12 for 420 and what most people are probably going to want to use, but then there's YUI2 for 422 and XRGB for 444 if you want completely lossless capture. Just keep in mind that does require higher processing power in order to encode. And then of course the P010 color space is used for HDR. System requirements: you need Windows 10 64-bit, an Intel 6th gen Core i5 or a Ryzen 5 or above, 8 gigs of RAM, and then 10th gen NVIDIA GTX 1050 or above, or the AMD R7 560 or above. Personally, I would highly recommend NVIDIA if you're interested in doing HDR or anything like that, because the HEVC encoder on modern NVIDIA graphics cards is way better than anything AMD has to offer at the moment, as I've covered thoroughly on my channel. Latency wise, testing this capture card to OBS's preview, I got about 43 milliseconds on input 1, which is the pass-through input for your game system, and then about 42 milliseconds on the input 2 for your camera, which is within margin of error of being the same. It's not as fast as the Live Gamer 4K, but it's the second fastest next to it, so it's pretty dang fast and perfectly fine for syncing up your audio and things like that. So kudos to AVerMedia for keeping that intact, even with 2 inputs. Now, of course, I could not test this like both at the same time, but theoretically, it's fine as long as you're not on some super slow PCIe bandwidth connection for some reason, or something's not going wrong. Latency will be a-okay. You know what else will be a-okay? Our sponsor for this video, Nerd or Die.
Alright, you know you need better stream graphics, but you're not sure what to do. I've got some good news for you. Nerd or Die's summer sale has been extended through August 23rd. That's right, they've basically kept this sale going all month. So there's really no excuse to have boring stream graphics. Head on over to EposVox.gg/nerdordie and save 25% on anything in the store. Don't miss it. Here's their Overdrive stream package, for example. Here's a sick background you get from the Nova Pixel Art pack. And as I leave you, here's a stick stinger from the Interface pack. Bye!
As the name implies, the Live Gamer Duo has 2 inputs, one for gaming and one for your camera, and they both show up as separate capture devices, Duo 1 and Duo 2. Each can be accessed separately in OBS and RECentral, so move and manage to your heart's content. Also, since they show up as separate devices, you can capture them in separate programs for a full quality face cam and gameplay recording simultaneously, which is pretty awesome and something a lot of people want to try to do to make their video editing a little bit better. Or you can easily flip between a gaming recording session and a vlog with the same setup without having to manage multiple capture cards or HDMI switching or anything like that. However, it is still HDMI only. If you want to use DisplayPort, you either have to use an adapter for the input and then a separate DisplayPort cable to your monitor, if your monitor requires DisplayPort, or you'll just run DisplayPort to your monitor and then HDMI to the capture card and use display cloning. However, display cloning will always have issues compared to pass-through, so if your monitor supports HDMI 2.0, you should probably use pass-through because it's just generally the way to go. For OBS setup, simply add a new video capture device and then choose Duo 1 or Duo 2. Duo 1 is the pass-through for games, Duo 2 is for your camera. I mean, you could use it for game consoles as well, but you're not going to have a pass-through. So you could use this as a dual gaming capture card input, you just need an HDMI splitter on input number 2. Leave it on default or specify your specs if you want YUI2 or XRGB as I prefer. However, that does require more processing power to encode, so keep that in mind. The audio device will sync up automatically with the video device, so that is pretty nice. And then HDR to SDR is automatically tone mapped when the device is run through OBS, so you don't even have to worry about that. Over in RECentral, it shows 2 different device entries in your capture card setup for their software. So you have a Live Gamer Duo 1, Live Gamer Duo 2. It treats them as 2 separate capture cards, as it should. So setup, streaming, and recording profiles, I recommend cranking pretty much everything up to the max. I use 250 megabits per second with the HEVC encoder because I have an NVIDIA Turing graphics card. If you have a 10 series as well, that works. Unfortunately, audio is still limited to 192 kilobits per second, which is pretty frustrating, but whatever. You can actually record HDR if you're using an HDR signal here, so you can record full HDR gameplay. That software you use to edit that will have to support it, of course, or you just direct upload it to YouTube, in which case it'll show both HDR and SDR depending on what you're watching it on. Otherwise, if you don't press the HDR button to record HDR, it just tone maps it to SDR, and you don't even have to think about it, which is really freaking cool. If you want to use both inputs for obviously overlaying your face on top of your gameplay, you can, or just build a full scene setup like OBS, you have to use the multi-mode. So by default, it's in single mode, you're just recording one device at a time. But if you click multi, then it takes you to basically their own version of OBS, where you can then, build out entire live streaming scenes and all of that. However, HDR only works in single mode because you can't stream HDR anywhere at this point in time. The edit button next to each device's, the little pencil icon, lets you change color modes to XRGB and things like that, which again does require more processing power. If you need to record something like an iPad or an iPhone, you need to go to the actual settings cog in the top left and then choose your device and turn off HDCP detection. However, I would leave it on if you're not recording Apple devices because it can cause problems with other devices, as I found. So I mentioned that you could record each input separately in separate programs for full quality, which is already really powerful and really cool. However, I also stumbled upon the fact that you can actually record either input or both inputs in multiple programs at the same time, which Elgato was touting as their multi-app capability, and nothing else had really supported that before. So at least on the gaming side. So that is pretty cool, and it works as you would expect for the most part. There's a little bit of a quirk. So I would recommend launching OBS first and accessing the device and then RECentral, as I had some issues if RECentral was open first and then I open OBS. But I had 2 different instances of OBS, which is already usually a conflict, plus RECentral, accessing both inputs on the Live Gamer Duo without any issue. So I could just switch between them on the scenes, and I had the same game loaded up in different inputs. Pretty freaking cool. You can finally record your full stream, in full quality without any overlays while streaming with all of your overlays with an AVerMedia card, or, just record your gameplay while you're streaming with your gameplay and your face cam. You can do all sorts of stuff here that makes it really powerful. And you can set it up for instant replays as well, where you have a separate OBS instance running just for instant replays that only has your gameplay. So when you play it back, it doesn't have all your alerts and everything else, just your gameplay, which is pretty handy. Unfortunately, input 2 is not UVC, so if you want to use your dedicated camera input for video calling, you can't use it directly. You still have to use OBS Virtual Cam, so that's a little bit annoying. I did mention there were some quirks with the multi-app. It's not always perfect. Sometimes there's hiccups whenever a new app accesses it, it'll cut out and then come back, and sometimes one will flip upside down. But overall, pretty cool. And like I said, so far Elgato's the only one on the gaming space that has had this. They originally launched the 4K 60 Pro Mark II with it, and then later added it to the HD60 Pro and the HD60S. But this is AVerMedia's first, so stream and record without overlays to your heart's content. It's less reliable with oddball, like ultra-wide resolutions from PC than a console setup, but it's easy to set up regardless. However, this will not let you stream in SDR and record in HDR. If you turn on HDR in RECentral and then open it up in OBS, it tries sending the HDR signal to OBS and it's just a completely messed up disaster. So unfortunately, it doesn't have that superpower because basically as soon as it's in, being in HDR or SDR for capture is a separate mode for the card, so every program kind of sees the same thing. All right, in terms of extra and oddball format support, it does work with ultra-wide pass-through, 3440 by 1440 up to 100 Hz, as did the Live Gamer 4K and 4K 60 Pro Mark II, so that's fine, but there's some caveats in the complaint section we'll talk about. 1080i does work as well. Yeah, it feels blurrier than usual. I can't pinpoint why I feel that way or what that would really mean, so I can't really, verify for sure, but it felt like it was a little bit more ghosty than 1080i usually is. 480p does work from the RetroTink as well. Initially, when I tried using it, I was getting some weird purple screen, but that seems to have been a fluke because it works fine both from the Super Nintendo and the PlayStation 1 just fine. Impressively, the OSSC also works, but there's a caveat there that's kind of amusing, in that on input 1, which is the 4K pass-through mode, which should support more modes, OSSC only works 2x through 4x. They all work fine, they look great, and so on, but 5x just gives no signal. However, on input 2, which is the only supports 1080p 60 and doesn't even support 4K 30 input, 5x works. So that's a little weird, but then you could use the main input as your main gaming capture card for your modern consoles, and then the second input for your retro systems, if you already have it split off to run to a CRT or something anyway. Just a potential use case. I thought it was weird and worth mentioning. The iPad Pro works as well. Detects 4K HDR as most systems do. You do, of course, have to turn off HDCP detection, so that's fine. Got some gameplay going, things like that. My phones did not work with HDCP detection off. So my Android phones, I usually with these capture cards just leave that mode off. That way the iPad always works and most things work. But most of my phone's video outputs were not working when I had it off. So I had to turn HDCP detection back on, and then I was able to detect phone signals. So that was a little weird. So I did have some little issues and some wish list items for this capture card, as I usually do. RECentral generally had some minor early access issues with this card. Of course, I had it before launch. This is ideally being released on the day that it was announced. So like randomly the signal would flip upside down when it first accessed it. This was especially a problem whenever OBS was also accessing the feed. Usually just relaunching it fixed that, or disabling whatever program was also capturing it. Whenever the input changes, such as a game launching on my PS4, which then cuts the input out and brings it back, and this has been a problem with RECentral for a while, RECentral goes into low FPS detected and runs at a variable frame rate from 30 to 40 FPS or whatever and fluctuates back and forth, and never stabilizes back to a locked 60. I have to completely relaunch RECentral to do this. So that means if I'm changing games or the signal cuts out for whatever reason, basically I have to relaunch if I want to actually record a stable 60 FPS, which is really weird. It's not a performance thing. It's just a RECentral just like freaks out and doesn't know to lock it back to 60 or something. It's really kind of weird. Also, my big complaint here is that non-standard resolution PC formats are not amazing with this card, since it does lock everything to 1080p 60. 1440p seems a little blurry since it's a non-integer scale from 1440p to 1080p, whereas 4K is a clean 1/2 scale down to 1080p. This might be improved if you were capturing at 720p, but then it's blurry just because it's 720p. 3440 by 1440 is detected as 4K, which is a little weird. I think everything above like 1440p is just detected as 4K, whereas 1440p, it knows it's 1440p. But whenever I have 100 Hz enabled, it still just treats it as 60 Hz. It doesn't detect that it's running at 100 Hz. It clearly passes it through fine, so I don't think that matters overall, but that is a weird issue. And compared to the Live Gamer 4K or any native ultra-wide capture source, if you're using something like my preferred way to do ultra-wide for content creation, since not everyone has an ultra-wide monitor, is to run my game at ultra-wide, center the HUD, assuming the game gives you an option. Halo Master Chief Collection does, Modern Warfare does, unfortunately Apex does not. It's a big frustration I have. but I prefer to center the HUD and then crop off the sides and just make a native 2560 by 1440 video. You get to play an ultra wide, crop it off, and display 16 by 9 to everyone else, so it cooperates with streams and videos and things like that. However, doing it this way, since it automatically scales everything down to a 1080p 60 canvas, the ultra wide resolution is only like 720p-ish high with the letterboxing. And so once you crop in on that, you're getting this really low resolution video that is way more blurry than if you were cropping a native ultra wide image. So if you're an ultra wide user and looking to do cropping, your video is going to be much softer and lower res looking than AVerMedia's other options or Elgato's other options or what have you. So that is kind of disappointing. Also, greater than 60 hertz video signals, like 100 hertz, 144 hertz, or whatever, are going to tear a lot more since it's not actually bringing in every individual frame. Whereas with the Live Gamer 4K, it's bringing in all 100 hertz from my ultra wide, or all 144 hertz from my 1440p monitors, or all 240 hertz. In this, it's automatically doing the frame rate conversion in the card instead of in OBS, and it's dropping to 60 FPS. And so, at least perceptively, the 60 hertz signal is way more teary than on the other cards. So that was a little disappointing. I would have loved for input 2 to be detected as UVC, so that you could use it with video calling natively. I understand that that's probably not feasible on the same card, and there's reasons you wouldn't want that, and it would break the multi-app support. That's why, for example, the HD60S from Elgato got multi-app, but the HD60S Plus didn't, because it's using UVC drivers, which are just distributed by Windows. They can't add in that kind of functionality, so I get it. I also would have loved for input number 2 to support 4K 30 input. It doesn't make sense that it doesn't IMO, so that was kind of disappointing. And then of course we have the fact that there's no HDMI 2.1, which we'll talk about in the conclusion because it really bothers me. In terms of competition and where it stands in the market, this product is available right now for $249.99, 250 bucks. I was expecting it to be $400. I was expecting it to be way too expensive, launched way too late, and to complain about it. And instead, while it still launched later than I expected, $249 or $250 is a reasonable price for what you're getting here. That is cheaper than both the 4K 60 Pro and the Live Gamer 4K launched at, and it's currently cheaper than every listing I can find other than eBay for the Live Gamer 4K right now. So that puts it really right where it should be in the market. Like, that pricing is pretty good for what it is. It's still a pricey card. You're still paying a premium for an extra input and for the PCIe and for the uncompressed and all the cool stuff that this has. But comparatively, in context of the other cards that surround it, it's priced fairly reasonably, and I am impressed here. In terms of other cards that could do this, there's not a ton of options. Blackmagic has their new Decklink Quad HDMI input, which I have 2 of, one in both of my main workstations. It has 4 inputs that accept 4K 60 each, which is pretty cool. You can record all 4 inputs at 4K 60 without any issues, but it is a PCIe 8X card, so it limits what systems you can use it in. I'm using it on Threadripper motherboards because PCIe lanes, but it's also $530. But they were able to get 4 4K 60 inputs on one card, so it does make, AVerMedia's both only capturing 1080p kind of look a little in that regard. But none of them have pass-through, and Blackmagic's cards, while it does seem to support 1440p 60, there's no support for ultra-wide or 100 hertz or 144 hertz or any of that. Magewell also has a 4-input capture card that's PCIe 8X for 900 bucks, but it's only 1080p. I was really hoping they had one, even for 900 bucks. I would pay that. That had the quad 4K input, because their cards are way more flexible about formats. Like, you could feed it any resolution, format, aspect ratio, whatever, and they'll just adapt it and be fine. And so that seemed like a better option for PC gaming splitting and things like that. But currently they only have a 1080p one, and it's 900 bucks. So that was disappointing. Elgato teased making it easier for gamers who want to be able to switch inputs and things like that. And so I don't know if they're just going to make their own HDMI matrix, or if they're going to make a capture card that has an HDMI switcher paired with it. I don't know what they're doing, but nothing has been confirmed so far. I would hope, as a competitor to this, I could see a Magewell 2-in, 2-out capture card that has pass-through for both and supports all the formats, all 4K, but I don't know when that would happen. All right, conclusion time. Should you buy the Live Gamer Duo? Is it worth buying? Was it a waste of time? Well, Honestly, it's pretty frustrating that neither Elgato nor AVerMedia managed to release this like 2 or 3 years ago, because this is such an obvious streamer need that it's just like, I feel like it was a missed opportunity up until this point. It's great that it's out now. This is wonderful, especially for console streamers. Dual PC streamers support's a little iffy here because of the compression issues and things like that I mentioned in terms of, you know, squishing your signal down, especially if you're on ultra wide and the screen tearing and things like that. But overall, like, it's a wonderful product. I just wish it would have released way sooner, and I'm kind of disappointed that it didn't. However, releasing a capture card right now, 3 months before the next generation of consoles, with a new HDMI spec, feels a little bit scary or risky, IMO. Because currently no capture card on the market supports HDMI 2.1 or the crazy things that it supports, such as 8K60, 4K 120, adaptive sync, any of that. There's no adaptive sync on this either, which has been really hurting PC gamers. I'm not really sure how that will play out, because the early adopters, once again, are going to be punished, because we have 3 months until PS5 and Xbox Series X come out, theoretically, assuming more delays don't happen. There's going to be a lot of people who rush out and already have the one of 2 HDMI 2.1 spec TVs on the market and be like, why can't I capture this? And of course, I'm always going to say, you adopted way too early, sorry, can't help you. But I have been getting nervous that up until this point, no capture cards have supported that spec. Like I said, just making me a little nervous here. I would love this exact same card, except the input and pass-through is DisplayPort. So that, or either it's even HDMI input and DisplayPort output for PC gamers. That would probably be a little too weird for PC gamers, but DisplayPort pass-through. There was a DataPath card I reviewed a few years ago that had a DisplayPort input, which I used for PC, and then an HDMI input, which I used for camera. It was posed as this exact kind of thing. I would love to see AVerMedia or Elgato finally bite the bullet and make a DisplayPort card, and doing it in this format would be phenomenal as well. Alternatively, people who don't want to use it for the second input for a camera, if it was DisplayPort and HDMI input, then that could be people who run their PC and their game consoles through it, and definitely not have to switch, which would be really cool. Overall, it's a wonderful card. Most streamers, most YouTubers only want or need 1080p video capture in the first place, so you don't have to worry about the 4K stuff or deal with that or any of that, and you're paying a little bit less for it as well, which is pretty cool. You could run a separate cam link to pair with your 4K 60 Pro or Live Gamer 4K, but this saves you on the PCIe lane usage or on the USB usage, and a lot of people run into issues with that, so this is overall a much more reliable way to run a gaming input and a camera input on the same card, and makes it a lot easier to set up. So that is pretty cool, and it can pair nicely with the Live Gamer 4K in the same machine as well, should you just need to expand your inputs. So that's pretty cool. It's definitely worth the price, especially for streamers looking for a more all-in-one setup and haven't really settled on a capture card yet. This is what you're looking for, but I do have some concerns overall, and if you are specifically a dual PC streamer, I would question whether you could pay the extra $50 for the Live Gamer 4K and then have a separate capture card for your camera, because I wasn't super happy with the PC capture from this. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe for more stream education. I'm your stream professor, EposVox. Check us out on Floatplane, where you can get early access to videos, behind the scenes content. Come talk about this with us over on our Discord server, eposvox.gg/Discord. Product links will be in the affiliate links will be in the description below. I'll see you next time.